The peace Min-Jun purchased with his life was shattered. He had chosen integrity over power, but the consequence was immediate war, fought not with armies, but with parchment. Captain Jeom, a harsh, thin man, strode into the courtyard, followed by 2 armed soldiers. Min-Jun, Mae-Hwa, and Haryung watched from the doorway. Minister Min-Jun, it is a true disgrace to see you in such humble surroundings. I expected more grandeur from the High Minister of War. Jeom declared loudly, clearly enjoying the moment. Min-Jun's stance was rigid but calm. Your presence is a trespass, Captain. My status, though reduced, is protected by royal decree. Jeom smirked, unfolding a parchment. Protected? Ah, the document of your generous exile. But documents, Minister, are like ice in a warm hand. They melt when exposed to truth. Mae-Hwa stepped forward slightly. What truth do you carry, Captain? We receive official dispatches. This is not a dispatch, Lady Mae-Hwa. This is an order, Jeom said, shaking the parchment. Signed by the Prime Minister and ratified by the King's seal. It declares the former servant, Aderija, to be state property, stolen under duress by a known traitor. That is you, Minister Min-Jun. Mae-Hwa gasped sharply. Stolen? The liberation was a signed, witnessed contract. Jeom's voice turned vicious. A contract signed by a man whose mind the king deemed unsound and whose status was compromised. Your signature is meaningless. Aderija is a runaway slave, and anyone sheltering him is guilty of high treason. The decree includes a small incentive for citizens, 500 gold for his capture. Min-Jun's voice was low, heavy with suppressed fury. Ijun is desperate. He uses the king's authority to execute a personal vendetta. Ijun is merely correcting an administrative oversight. Aderija is to be apprehended and returned to this northern garrison for immediate transport. Tell me, disgraced general, do you know where your miracle is hiding? Min-Jun stared him down. I know nothing of a runaway slave. You should not waste your valuable time on my humble, frozen estate. Jeom laughed. I will not waste a moment. This garrison is now my base of operations. I have 20 men and a king's decree. Your quiet garden is occupied, Minister. Do not leave its perimeter. He spun on his heel and strode toward the main barracks. Min-Jun watched him go, his hands clenching. Mae-Hwa rushed to Min-Jun, whispering urgently, he can't do this. Ijun promised grace. Grace is a luxury of the strong, Mae-Hwa. Ijun is testing me. He wants to prove that my sacrifice was a temporary lapse, not a final choice. Aderija's freedom is the last piece of power I hold. Ijun wants it back. If Aderija comes north, and he will walk into Jeom's net. We have to warn him. But how? Jeom will watch every courier, every letter. Haryung, holding the law book, spoke anxiously but resolutely. Father, the law isn't entirely dust. The King's Statute of 42. It requires public property transfers to be witnessed. The liberation contract was published in the South. Jeom's decree must be based on a lie about its validity. He's relying on fear and distance, not law. Placing a hand on Haryung's shoulder, Min-Jun's eyes gleamed with the strategist's fire. You are brilliant, son. The truth of the law must reach Aderija, and quickly. If he understands the flaw in Jeom's decree, he can fight the paperwork instead of running north. Mae-Hwa's intellectual mind took over. We need a cipher that looks like banality. Something that proves the Minister of War is truly the deranged carpenter they report him to be. Precisely. I'll use the wood. You use the botany. We'll encode a warning in a list of supplies for the South. What is the warning? Danger. The threat is legal. Do not come north. And the location where the law can be fought. The South Docks, where Aderija has his printing press. Let's begin. If Jeom hears us debating the structural integrity of a chess rook, he will only report my husband's deepening insanity. Min-Jun nodded and walked toward the woodshed, picking up a rough-sawn block of wood. Mae-Hwa followed, her expression determined. The general's greatest skill, deception, was now deployed for the sake of one life. The minister's documented insanity was their perfect veil. Min-Jun was obsessively carving a chess piece, a rook. He spoke loudly, almost performing, for the benefit of the spy lurking outside the shed, feigning boredom while listening. Mae-Hwa, I cannot work with this. The density is all wrong. I need the ginkgo wood. The ginkgo is the only wood dense enough to signify the immovability of the king's law. Mae-Hwa entered the shed, sounding utterly exasperated. The courier only brings walnut. Min-Jun, you are obsessed. You must make do. And this ridiculous obsession with 7 rings on the rook, it's madness. Min-Jun whispered without looking at her. Ginkgo is danger. Walnut is do not come. 7 rings is the turning point. Did you get the courier? Matching his tone, Mae-Hwa answered loudly, discussing herbs. Yes, he leaves before dawn. I need to encode the location. I will ask him to purchase the most noxious weed, found only at the intersection of 3 major rivers in the south. That points directly to the docks. Good. I will encode the threat on the carving itself. It needs to be an undeniable symbol of the law. Min-Jun quickly and delicately carved the small wooden chess piece into a perfect, miniature law scroll. The message must be subtle. Jeom will look for political symbols. He won't look for carpentry errors. Min-Jun carved a series of simple, barely visible parallel lines on the bottom of the scroll. Mae-Hwa sighed loudly. Min-Jun, what are those ridiculous lines on the base? What possible function do 2 parallel lines have on a scroll? It signifies nothing. On the contrary, wife, it signifies balance. The balance between the wood grain and the finished product. It is the essence of a craftsman's pride. Haryung entered, looking anxious. Father, the spy is still there. He's writing everything down in his log. He looks delighted. Min-Jun smiled, a terrifying sight. Let him be delighted. He will report that the disgraced general is debating the geometry of snowflakes and the structural integrity of chess pieces. It is the perfect veil. We must send him something for his effort. Casually, Min-Jun tossed a discarded piece of wood covered in random marks toward the shed door. Mae-Hwa, perhaps the captain will appreciate this sample of wood grain? I can't decide if the knot symbolizes ambition or failure. The spy quickly retreated to collect the piece, convinced he had evidence of Min-Jun's distraction. Min-Jun turned to his wife, his facade dropping. The courier leaves in an hour. We can't wait. I'll take the scroll. You prepare the list. Let's pray Aderija is not too consumed by his revolution to appreciate the language of fear. He is a healer, Min-Jun. He understands cause and effect. He will understand this consequence. The final act of treason was disguised as a transaction. The minister who once commanded armies was now relying on the loyalty of a simple courier and the arrogance of a captain. Captain Jeom approached the courier, scrutinizing him closely. You are the minister's errand runner. I suggest you remember your place. No unnecessary communications with the South. Anything you carry is subject to inspection. The courier trembled. Yes, Captain. Only supplies and Lady Mae-Hwa's list of routes. Min-Jun and Mae-Hwa emerged. Min-Jun held the small, carved law scroll. Minister, another piece of woodwork for your obsession? You surprise me with your dedication to the meaningless. A general needs an obsession, Captain. When the war is over, the mind needs trivial victories. Min-Jun smiled faintly. Mae-Hwa handed the courier a package and the supply list. Deliver this to the merchant, quickly, and tell him that the ginkgo is absolutely unacceptable for the next shipment. He must bring walnut instead. It is imperative. And ensure the 7 rings are not damaged in transit. My research depends on it. Jeom scoffed. Walnut, ginkgo. This is what the great High Minister wastes his time on. Min-Jun handed the courier the small wooden law scroll carving. This is for my distant cousin near the docks. Tell him I carved 2 simple parallel lines on the base. It signifies the peace of exile I now enjoy. It is a symbol of great irony. Jeom snatched the carving, examining the lines. Parallel lines? They signify only laziness, minister. He threw it back. Begone, courier. The courier scrambled away quickly. Min-Jun and Mae-Hwa watched him go. Softly, Min-Jun said to Mae-Hwa, if Aderija doesn't understand the language of irony, we are lost. He has a debt of life to pay. He will understand the language of consequence. Now we prepare for war. What is our defense if he fails? We stand. If he is captured, I will confess publicly to the true murder, the one Ijun used against me years ago. It will discredit Ijun's regime and prove that his justice is just a different kind of ambition. I will use my death to save the liberation. Mae-Hwa was horrified. You would sacrifice yourself for a slave you barely know. For an abstract principle. Turning to her, Min-Jun's eyes were clear and resolute. No, Mae-Hwa. I would sacrifice myself to save the man I chose to become. The father who values truth over survival. That is the final price of my son's life. She sighed, the scientist defeated by the human. Then I will find a way to leak the information about Jeom's fraudulent decree, making your confession redundant. We will fight with law and logic. Hundreds of miles away, the general's fear was translated into the language of the revolution. Aderija was teaching a group of newly freedmen, pointing to a published copy of the liberation contract. We must learn the laws better than the king's own servants. The parchment gave us life, but life requires teeth. The courier found Aderija and handed him the package and the carving nervously. A message from the north. The lady said the ginkgo is unacceptable and he must bring walnut. And the 7 rings must not be damaged. And the minister sends this scroll carving for his cousin near the docks. He said it has 2 parallel lines on the base. Aderija's face turned instantly grim. He dismissed the courier and focused on the items. Ginkgo is danger. Walnut is do not come. 7 rings is the turning point. The danger is imminent, and I must not travel north. He examined the law scroll carving, noticing the parallel lines and the material. The material is pine, easily warped. The symbol is the law scroll. This means the threat is legal and fragile. Opening the list, he saw the obscured reference to the intersection of 3 rivers, the docks. The location is here. He has given me the battleground and the warning. Now for the motive. Aderija pulled out the new royal decree, Jeom's parchment, which had been posted publicly. A young freedman shouted angrily. They say it is the king's will. They say the minister's mind was unsound. Aderija's voice tightened with tension. That is the lie. The general's message is the truth. He sent a carving with 2 parallel lines. This means 2 laws run in opposition. He opened the king's statute of 42 and slammed it next to the liberation contract. Look, the king's statute of 42. It states that any debt settlement made on behalf of the crown must be signed by 3 witnesses. Min-Jun's liberation contract was signed with 1 witness, Lee-Jun, who was not yet prime minister. So the contract is invalid. Lee-Jun can void it, an older freedman exclaimed. No. If the original liberation contract is invalid because it lacked the required witnesses, then the king's new decree to re-enslave us is null and void. It is based on a legally invalid premise. It's not treason. It's an administrative error. Lee-Jun has made a mistake. Astonished, the young freedman asked, Min-Jun knew this? The general did not send a cure. He sent a weapon. He sacrificed his life to give us this legal flaw. We must make this error public. Now, print a public challenge based on Statute 42. We fight with law. The war shifted from the frozen north to the printed pages of the south. Days passed. Captain Jeom was cornering Min-Jun, furious that his patrols had yielded nothing. You are hiding something, minister. Your feigned peace is a pretense. I will search every floorboard, every loose stone. Min-Jun sat calmly by the fire, reading a book on northern moss. Do as you wish, Captain, but you should focus on the messenger, the one who carries the true poison. Mae-Hwa had strategically placed a rare herbalist book on the table, highlighting a page about a common, highly toxic northern moss. To Jeom, with patronizing concern, she said, the water here is difficult, Captain. The moss is highly toxic if ingested. You must monitor everything, especially the moss on your garrison water barrels. Highly toxic. Jeom's face darkened with immediate paranoia. He sent a man to check the barrels, diverting his focus from Min-Jun. Mae-Hwa whispered, did it work? Min-Jun nodded. He trusts fear more than reason. He's distracted. Now, the final contingency. Min-Jun walked to the iron lockbox where he kept the duplicate treason contract. What are you doing? Mae-Hwa asked. We need insurance. If Aderija fails, I will use my death to save the liberation. Her eyes wide with panic, she said, you will use the king's seal to nullify it. Save yourself. Shaking his head, Min-Jun replied, no. If I nullify it, I betray Aderija. I betray my son. I betray myself. I have to be ready to confess the truth of Daehun's death publicly, proving Lee-Jun's corruption is greater than mine. Clutching his arm, Mae-Hwa said, that is instant execution. I won't let you. The general is dead. The father remains. This is my final choice, Mae-Hwa. A loud commotion outside. A single, official rider approached, not one of Jeom's men. Jeom was distracted by the toxic moss check. Min-Jun said quietly, "The die is cast." He walked to meet the rider, who handed him a sealed dispatch. Min-Jun opened and read the dispatch. He smiled, a strange mix of defeat and triumph. Mae-Hwa rushed over. "What is it?" "Execution." Handing her the dispatch, Min-Jun said, "A different kind of execution. A clever one." Mae-Hwa read the dispatch. It was a new decree, signed by Lee-Jun, that reassigned Captain Jeom to a distant, unpleasant administrative post in the east, citing procedural negligence regarding the Statute of 42. It ended with a personal note. Reading the final line aloud, her voice trembling, she said, "Your mind is still unsound, Minister, but your son is healthy. Be grateful for the stability you purchased. The debt is settled. The liberation is safe." Aderija won the legal battle in the south. Lee-Jun was forced to back down. He saved his own legitimacy by sacrificing Jeom. Mae-Hwa's voice was a mixture of anger and relief. "He is still playing games. He will never let you truly be free." Looking out over the now quiet, snow-covered garden, Min-Jun said, "No, he won't. But he has acknowledged the value of my choice. He is protecting the status quo, and our freedom is now part of that status quo. The debt is settled." Days later, quiet returned to the garrison. Min-Jun and Mae-Hwa sat together by the fire. Jeom and his men were gone. Haryung was carving a horse, copying his father's old hobby. Softly, Mae-Hwa said, "You were prepared to die for the moral integrity of a signed piece of paper. I was prepared to die for the last honest act of my life. I couldn't bear to let my son see me choose my own survival over the survival of thousands." Reaching out, her fingers intertwining with his, Mae-Hwa said, "You sacrificed power, rank, and ambition. I sacrificed my arrogance. Our contractual marriage is gone, Min-Jun. But I think our partnership has finally begun." Squeezing her hand, Min-Jun said, "We fight not with swords, but with law, books, and patience. That is the only strategy left for us now." Haryung looked up from his carving. "Father, what does the debt is settled really mean?" Smiling faintly, Min-Jun answered, "It means Lee-Jun has chosen to let us live under perpetual scrutiny. He will always watch us. He will always remind us of the power he holds. But he will allow the legal liberation of Aderija to stand. He has chosen to be the righteous judge he always claimed to be." Looking at her husband, Mae-Hwa said, "You forced his hand. You made him choose grace over vengeance." Cut to the south. Aderija was at his printing press. He had received the news of Jeom's dismissal. The legal challenge was successful. The king's prime minister has retracted the decree of re-enslavement. "We are free," he told the freedman. Aderija looked north, a deep sense of respect and gratitude in his eyes. "Min-Jun gave us the courage to fight the law. He gave us the weapon." Cut back to the north. Min-Jun watched the snow begin to fall. To Mae-Hwa, he said, "The cure for treason was never medicine. It was the absolute submission to truth. The willingness to pay the ultimate price." Whispering, Mae-Hwa replied, "And in that price, we found freedom." A sudden rustling came from the garden's edge. Shadows shifted beneath the ancient trees. A single, cloaked figure emerged, holding a folded parchment sealed with an ominous, unfamiliar mark. Mae-Hwa's breath hitched. "What now?" Min-Jun's eyes narrowed, the fire of the general sparking to life. "The debt is settled, but the war for truth is far from over." He stepped forward, resolute. The saga continues. The greatest threat often comes not from your enemies, but from the shadow of the past you thought you buried.